If I had known that the person I entrusted my heart to would someday use my back as target practice, I would never have let her cross my doorstep. Our house sat quietly in a peaceful suburb just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. One-story homes lined the curved street like pearls on a string. Kids rode bikes in the late afternoon sun. Neighbors waved from porches with beers in hand. The smell of freshly cut grass lingered in the air, only occasionally overpowered by the sweet aroma of someone grilling steaks a few houses down. It was the kind of neighborhood where secrets felt impossible. And yet, one was growing inside the walls of my own home like mold beneath paint. My name is Lana. I'm 38, married for 12 years to a man named Brad. We have one son, Mason, who's 7. I work from home as a part-time graphic designer. Brad, a structural engineer, often left early and came home late. Our routine was solid, predictable, comforting. I used to find joy in that predictability. I used to think we had it good, normal, safe. And then there was her, Carly. Carly moved in next door 3 years ago after a messy divorce. She was magnetic from the start, tall, lean, with a head of loose chestnut curls and a laugh that made even the grumpiest neighbor smile. But what drew me in wasn't her looks. It was her brokenness. There was something raw about her, something aching beneath her cheerfulness. And I saw myself in that. She became my friend, then my best friend, and eventually, something more intimate than that. Not in the romantic sense, but in the dangerous way two women sometimes fill in the spaces their men leave behind. She'd watch Mason when I had meetings. I'd pick up her groceries when she was sick. We drank wine together on Saturday nights while Brad watched sports. We talked about everything, her ex-husband, my fears about aging, sex, politics, motherhood, the dream of running away from it all. She became, quite simply, my sister, the kind I never had. I trusted her with the spare key to my house. She had my garage code. She knew what days Brad worked late, when Mason had soccer, when I was most vulnerable. And maybe that's when I stopped seeing. Looking back now, I can see the moments where the curtain slipped. The times Brad smiled too long at one of her jokes. The way Carly would compliment his cologne more than once. The slight tension in the air when the three of us were in a room. The way their eyes met sometimes with a kind of silent language I couldn't quite translate. But at the time, I chalked it all up to my own insecurities. I'd just turned 38. My body wasn't what it used to be. Brad and I had stopped having regular sex. I was tired, overwhelmed, grateful for any adult interaction that didn't involve school drop-off lines or PTA meetings. I needed Carly, and I needed to believe that what we had, this soft, cozy little world we created between our families, was safe. The truth is, I loved her, deeply, not romantically, but in a way that's hard to explain. She filled a space in me that had been empty for years. Maybe longer, and that love, that blind, aching, open-hearted love, is what made the betrayal possible. No one can hurt you like someone you've made part of your inner world. I remember one night in particular. It was late September, the air was cooling, and the trees had just started to blush with fall. We'd had a backyard cookout. Carly brought her famous potato salad. Brad grilled ribs. Mason ran around with the other neighborhood kids. The sun set in that golden way it does when summer dies gently into autumn. We were laughing, God. We were always laughing. When Carly reached over to wipe barbecue sauce off Brad's chin. It was innocent, playful, everyone laughed, even me, but for a fraction of a second. Just a blink. Brad looked at her like I hadn't seen him look at me in years. Not with lust, with something quieter, familiarity, comfort, intimacy, like she wasn't just a neighbor, not even a friend, like she was already his. And still, I didn't see. The mind is a funny thing. It edits what it can't handle. It blurs the edges of danger when safety is all you've ever known. I didn't see her slowly infiltrating my marriage. Because to admit that meant acknowledging that the two people I loved most were capable of colluding against me. Carly started dropping by more often when Brad was home. She'd bring over leftover banana bread or ask if I had cream for her coffee. Harmless things. But always when Brad was in the kitchen. Always lingering just a little too long. Sometimes, when I left the room, I'd hear them laughing, not loud, just quiet, intimate, the kind of laugh that curls into the cracks of your soul when you're not looking. I'd turn the corner and they'd stop, smile at me like nothing had happened. Brad would kiss me on the cheek. Carly would compliment my dress. And I'd believe them, because I wanted to, because the alternative meant that everything I thought I had, everything I'd built, was a lie. There were moments when the doubt crawled up my spine like ice. One night, Brad came home late, said he'd gone for drinks with a client. I noticed a smudge of lipstick on his collar. I joked about it. He said it must have been from a cheek kiss. His client was a woman. Apparently, I laughed it off. Carly laughed even louder when I told her. And then she changed the subject. I didn't question it. I should have. But when you've built your life like a house of cards, even the slightest breeze of suspicion can bring the whole thing down. So I smiled. I drank wine. I baked banana bread. I planned fall festivals and decorated pumpkins and kept pretending. I see now that love makes you blind, but trust makes you complicit in your own deception. And I trusted Carly. I trusted her with my child, my home, my secrets. I trusted her enough to let her walk through my front door without knocking. To pour herself a cup of coffee. To sit beside my husband on the couch while I changed Mason's sheets upstairs. I thought I was building a sisterhood. I didn't know I was building an alibi. Everything seemed fine, normal, until the day it wasn't. But that day, that comes later. For now, in this first chapter of the unraveling, all you need to know is that I loved deeply. I trusted blindly, and I ignored the shadows dancing just beyond the light. Because when you believe you're safe, you don't look for the exit. You open the door, offer coffee, and let the wolf sit at your table. I used to think I was just being paranoid, until the day I saw her step out of his car. Her lipstick smudged and her eyes avoiding mine. The evening had started normally enough. Brad had texted to say he was working late again, that a project at the firm needed finalizing. Carly had dropped by around 6 to bring over leftover chili. She stayed to chat, played with Mason for a bit, and said she had to run a quick errand. I offered to watch her dog while she was out. A couple of hours later, I stepped outside to take out the trash. That's when I saw it, Brad's car pulling up at the end of the street. I recognized the silhouette in the passenger seat immediately, Carly. They sat there for a moment. Neither of them moved. Then the dome light came on, and I saw her lean over, her face disappearing toward him. A kiss, a whisper, I couldn't tell, but when she stepped out of the car, her lipstick was smudged across her cheek. And she didn't look back. She didn't even notice me. Or maybe she did, and chose not to react. I stood frozen behind the recycling bin, my fingers stiff in the cold air. My thoughts spun like a washing machine on the final cycle. Why was she in his car? Why didn't she mention she'd seen him? Why did she look guilty? I didn't confront her. I didn't confront him. Instead, I walked back inside, poured myself a glass of wine, and told myself there had to be an explanation. But the seed had been planted, and it didn't stop growing. Brad began coming home later, his excuses flimsier each time. Traffic was a nightmare. Last-minute meeting, lost track of time. Each phrase landed in my gut like pebbles adding weight to a drowning woman. Meanwhile, Carly became omnipresent. She'd pop by unannounced, let herself in if I didn't answer the door. She acted as though nothing had changed, cheerful, chatty, the same comforting friend. But I wasn't the same. I started noticing things, subtle changes. A coffee mug left on the kitchen counter that I hadn't used, but Carly had. The faint scent of her perfume on Brad's hoodie, an inside joke between them I'd never heard before. I brushed it off, again, and again, because facing the truth meant accepting that my marriage, and my closest friendship, were built on a lie. One morning, Brad left his work tablet on the kitchen table. He never did that. Something about the way it sat there, screen dark, pulled at my chest. I told myself not to look, I told myself I was better than that. I opened it anyway. There weren't messages, no smoking gun, but there were browser tabs, Airbnb listings in Asheville, 2 guests, romantic cabins, all bookmarked, none mentioned to me. When I asked him about taking a fall trip together, he said work was too busy. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I sat in the bathtub later that night and stared at the tiles. I watched the condensation trail down the walls like veins. I tried to breathe through the nausea of not knowing. And then came the moment I couldn't pretend anymore. It was a Tuesday, rainy, cold, the kind of day that turns everything gray. I forgot to pack Mason's lunch, so I drove back to the school around noon. Brad had said he was working from home that day, headache. He claimed. As I drove back toward our street, I saw Carly's SUV parked discreetly 2 blocks down. Something snapped. I turned the corner and drove past my own house slowly. Brad's car was there. The blinds in the living room were closed. A light flickered behind them. Carly hadn't mentioned coming over. I parked. I waited. For 10 minutes, then 20, then 45. When she finally stepped out, her hair was damp, not from rain, but from a shower. Her clothes were different from that morning. She walked with the casual ease of someone who had nothing to hide, or who no longer cared if she did. And that was when I knew. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I watched her cross the yard and head back to her SUV. She didn't glance around, didn't even check if anyone had seen. Because what do you have to fear when the wife is too blind to fight back? I drove away that day with the kind of scream building in my throat that never gets released. It festers. It poisons. I told myself maybe I misunderstood. Maybe she was just bringing soup. Maybe they had paperwork to discuss. Though what paperwork? I couldn't say. I didn't confront anyone. I just stopped sleeping. Stopped eating. I stayed up late, scrolling through old photos of us all smiling in the backyard. I replayed moments. Her hand brushing his shoulder. His eyes tracking her across the room. I was unraveling. Quietly, slowly, the way a life ends, not with an explosion, but with threads loosening until the fabric comes undone in your hands. Still, I told no one, not my mother, not my sister. I wore my mask and showed up. For Mason, for the neighbors, for the illusion. But inside, something had cracked, and it would never quite heal again. Because once you see lipstick on someone else's mouth, in your husband's car, you can't unsee it. You can only wait for the next truth to bleed through the seams. I wish I had never opened his phone. Because the moment I did, I stopped being the woman I used to be. It was a Saturday morning. Crisp, bright, the kind of day when the world looks too clean to contain betrayal. Brad was in the shower. His phone buzzed once, then again, on the nightstand. I never checked his phone. Not even when I had doubts. Not even after the night I saw Carly with lipstick on her cheek. I believed that respecting his privacy was the last thread I had left to claim dignity. But that morning, something shifted. I reached for the phone with hands colder than the room around me. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Maybe I wanted to be wrong. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that my paranoia was eating me alive for no reason. But I wasn't wrong. The moment I unlocked it, he hadn't changed the passcode. I saw the heart emojis in the notifications. One from a contact saved under the letter C, no full name. Just C, with a cherry blossom icon next to it. A detail so juvenile, so deliberately coded, it made my stomach flip. I opened the messages. My breath left my body. Photos of them in a hotel room. Not posed, intimate, stolen, real. Her body half covered by sheets I recognized. Sheets I'd folded last spring. The same pattern we used when Brad and I had gone to that Asheville inn for our 10th anniversary. The bedposts were identical. Messages. I miss your skin. You still smell like me. Can't stop thinking about last night. And the worst, audio clips. I pressed play. Her voice, hushed and giggling. Stop it, Bear. Someone might hear. His voice, deeper, slower. Let them. You're mine now. Peach. Bear and Peach. I dropped the phone like it burned. My knees gave out. I sat on the carpet and stared at the wall. I don't remember how long I stayed like that. Time dissolved. Noise disappeared. My heart, my brain, my breath, they all stopped working in unison. Because it wasn't just infidelity. It was intimacy, nicknames, rituals, a parallel relationship so rooted and alive that it made mine look like a placeholder. They had a language, a world. I was the ghost in my own home. He walked out of the bathroom 20 minutes later, a towel slung around his waist, humming a song. When he saw me sitting on the floor, eyes blank, he paused. "Lana, you okay?" I looked up. I wanted to scream, throw things, ask him why, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't obey. I was paralyzed by the scope of it all, the way it went beyond betrayal into a deeper, darker wound. I wasn't just cheated on. I was replaced. That day, I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I waited until he left to meet a client. Then I took the phone again. This time more methodically. I went through everything. There were emails to a private account, flight confirmations, Uber rides to hotels, shared playlists on Spotify, a grocery list she'd sent him, with, "Your favorite wine, baby," next to a bottle we used to share. Every single detail was another knife. And I took each one in silence. Because by then, I had no tears left. I was no longer sad. I was hollow. Something inside me had cracked open and spilled out, leaving nothing behind but ash. What hurt most wasn't the sex. It wasn't even the lies. It was the effort. He remembered her favorite songs. He booked cozy hideaways. He planned dinners. He gave her pieces of himself I thought he no longer had to give. I used to think he was just tired. That work had drained him. That marriage had settled into comfort. But he wasn't tired. He was just giving the best of himself to someone else. I sat at the dining table with a yellow legal pad and started writing things down. Not for evidence. Not for revenge. For clarity. Dates, messages, locations. Times Carly had been too busy to hang out. Times Brad had been working late. The overlap was staggering. They weren't even careful, because why would they be? I was their cover story. I was the decoy. That night, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, not wine, not anymore, and listened to every single audio clip they'd exchanged. I wanted to hear the tone in his voice when he said her name. I wanted to understand what version of him existed when I wasn't around. He was lighter, softer, a man I hadn't seen in years, maybe one I never really knew. And Carly, her voice was higher, sweeter, almost childlike. She spoke to him in a way she never spoke to me. There was no trace of the woman who drank hard cider with me on Friday nights or helped me fold laundry. She'd become someone else with him. Or maybe, I was never the one who got the real Carly. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, replaying everything in my mind, again and again, until the sun came up. When Mason came into the kitchen that morning, I smiled. I poured his cereal. I packed his lunch. I kissed his forehead and sent him off like nothing had changed. Because for him, nothing had. But for me, everything had. I now lived in a world where the people I trusted most had built a life without me inside it, and done so while sleeping in my sheets, drinking from my mugs, and laughing in my living room. And the worst part, I still hadn't told them I knew. Because I wasn't ready. Not to fight, not to cry, but to become something else. Not the betrayed wife, not the broken friend, but the woman who would not go quietly. And from that day forward, I began watching them the way they had watched me. I no longer needed to doubt. Because the truth was in my hands. And it was sharper than any knife they could ever twist in my back. I didn't cry when I signed the divorce papers. The tears had all been spent the day she held his hand in front of me. It was a Tuesday, always a Tuesday. It seemed rainy again, like the weather had become a narrator in my life, casting shadows over every pivotal moment. We met at the attorney's office downtown. Neutral walls, neutral faces, 2 signatures, 1 goodbye. Brad didn't say much. He looked tired, but not broken. I wondered, briefly, if he had cried at all, if he had laid awake the way I had. staring at ceilings and timelines and all the what-ifs that now meant nothing. He held the pen like a man closing a lease. Efficient. Final. I held it like I was burying a version of myself. But no, I didn't cry, because what do you cry for when everything's already gone? It had been a month since I found the messages. 2 weeks since I told him I knew. That confrontation was quieter than I'd imagined it would be. I had pictured screaming, accusations, a table flipped over in rage. But instead, when I looked him in the eye and said, "I know about you and Carly," he simply nodded. Not even surprise, just confirmation. He didn't deny it, didn't apologize. He said, "I didn't mean for it to happen." I remember laughing, bitter and sharp. "You didn't mean for it to last this long." "You mean?" He didn't answer, so I walked upstairs, packed 2 suitcases for Mason and me, and went to stay at my sister's place on the other side of town. I didn't explain anything to Mason, just that we needed a break. I told him his daddy loved him, and so did I, and sometimes grown-ups don't love each other the same way anymore. He didn't understand, but he nodded, because he's 7, and 7-year-olds still believe you when you smile through heartbreak. Back at the attorney's office, I signed the final page and pushed the file across the table. Brad glanced at me, opened his mouth to say something, and then closed it again. He left first. I waited 5 minutes before stepping out. That was when I saw them. Standing by his car, in the drizzle, Carly, wearing the raincoat I once complimented her on. She held his hand. Held it. Not snuck, not avoided, not hidden. Held it openly, in the street, outside the building where his marriage had just been dissolved. I stood on the steps and stared at them. She saw me. Her eyes widened just for a second. Then she smiled, a faint, almost pitying curve of her lips. She didn't let go of his hand. I wasn't angry, I wasn't even shocked. I was done. The pain didn't come in waves anymore. It sat in my bones like lead. Heavy, unmoving. My breath wasn't shallow with panic. It was slow with fatigue. This wasn't heartbreak. This was aftermath. 2 weeks later, a neighbor texted me, "Did you know Carly's moving in with Brad? Saw the U-Haul this morning." Of course she was. There was no need to hide anymore. No more closed blinds. No more coded texts. They had graduated from secrecy into something louder, normalcy. I drove by the house. Our house. The lawn was freshly mowed. Mason's swing still hung from the tree. Her car was parked in the driveway. She'd brought over flower pots, lavender and rosemary, the kind she used to tell me she wished she had space for. I didn't stop. I didn't honk. I just watched for a moment. Observed this new life forming like a scab over mine. Inside the car, Mason asked, "Are we going back home yet?" "No," I said gently, "not that home. But Daddy's there." I swallowed. "Yes, he is. And Miss Carly?" "Yes." He was quiet for a while. "Will I live there again too?" I looked at his face in the rearview mirror. He wasn't asking to go back. He was just trying to make sense of the rules. "No, baby," I said, "you'll visit, but our home is somewhere new now." And that was true. We moved into a small apartment near the school. 1 bedroom for him, 1 for me, new walls, new routines, no shared mugs or drawers that smelled like betrayal. At night, after he fell asleep, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling. Not crying, not grieving, just empty. Because anger fades, sadness fades, but the emptiness, what they leave behind when they take the truth and gut your world with it, that stays longer. Friends asked how I was. I said I was fine. They asked what happened. I told them. They fell in love. It was the easiest answer. Cleaner than the truth. No one wants to hear about audio messages or hotel receipts. No one wants to know about cherry blossom emojis or grocery lists from mistresses. So I let them believe it was mutual drift. Growing apart. Irreconcilable differences. But I knew better. I knew that Carly had smiled in my kitchen while planning nights in his hotel room. I knew that Brad had kissed our son goodnight and then gone to bed with someone who used to borrow my clothes. And I knew that no matter how many new walls I built, there would always be a crack where the old house used to be. But I also knew one more thing. I survived. I didn't scream, I didn't beg, I didn't burn the house down or trash her flowerpots. I walked away, with grace, with silence, with scars, but also with my soul. Because while they had each other's bodies, I had something they would never find in each other. Peace. And eventually, that would be enough. Sometimes, the enemy doesn't come through the front door. They wear the mask of a friend and have had the key all along. The apartment was small but bright. The sunlight hit the kitchen counter just right in the mornings. And Mason's laughter echoed off the walls like it belonged there. We had a new routine now. Breakfast just the two of us. School drop-offs. Weekend walks to the park. It wasn't the life I imagined. But it was ours. And in its own quiet way. It was beautiful. Starting over wasn't the hard part. Trusting again, that was. For weeks after the divorce, I couldn't look anyone in the eye without wondering what version of themselves they were hiding. I avoided dinner invitations, skipped PTA meetings, and politely declined coffee with neighbors who once felt like family. I wasn't bitter, I was rebuilding, brick by brick. Trust had become a currency I no longer gave freely. Late at night, once Mason had gone to bed, I started writing. Not journals, not poetry, just truth. I wrote down everything I had gone through. The lies, the silence, the moment I saw Carly step out of Brad's car with smudged lipstick. The text messages, the audio clips, the look on her face when I saw them holding hands. It wasn't revenge, it was release. I posted one of my entries online, anonymously. It was raw, unedited, and full of the pain I hadn't yet said aloud. It went viral. Within hours, women from all over were commenting, sharing, messaging me privately. That was me last year. My best friend slept with my husband. 2. Thank you for putting this into words. Each message was a salve and a knife. Relief that I wasn't alone. Grief that so many others had walked this same path. I started a blog, still anonymous. I called it Keys Left Under the Mat. I wrote about betrayal, resilience, motherhood. I wrote about the way friendship can become a weapon when wielded by the wrong hands. I wrote about how women like Carly, charming, empathetic, helpful, are often the ones we trust most. And how that's exactly what they count on. One night, a message came through. You're helping me leave. I didn't think I had the strength until I read your story. I stared at the screen for a long time. Pain, when shared honestly, becomes power. My story wasn't unique, but my voice in telling it, that was mine again. Slowly, I started showing up in the world again. Not just physically, but emotionally. I reconnected with a college friend who'd once helped me through a rough patch. She didn't ask questions, just listened. And when I told her everything, from start to finish, she didn't flinch. She brought over Thai food and said, "You're stronger than both of them combined." That was the first night I truly slept. Mason adjusted faster than I expected. Kids are resilient. He missed his dad, of course. And when he visited, I made sure to pack his favorite snacks and never spoke poorly about Brad in front of him. My son didn't need both parents to be perfect. He just needed them to be honest. And I was, with him, with myself. Finally, one Saturday, while organizing old boxes, I found a photo of Carly and me at a neighborhood barbecue. Our arms around each other, our faces glowing with wine and laughter. I stared at it for a long time. She had once meant something real to me, and maybe, in her own twisted way, she believed she loved me, too. Maybe she never set out to hurt me. But intentions mean little when the wound is this deep. I didn't rip the photo. I didn't burn it. I placed it back in the box. Because the past doesn't need to be erased. It just needs to be placed where it belongs, behind us. Months passed. I began working full-time again. I painted our new living room a soft green. I joined a book club. I even flirted with someone at the farmer's market, a single dad with kind eyes and a crooked smile. I wasn't ready, but I wasn't closed, either. That's the thing no one tells you about heartbreak. It doesn't seal you off. It splits you open, and if you're lucky, light gets in. The blog gained traction, more stories poured in. I changed the settings, made it public. I added my name. Owning my truth out loud was the final step in reclaiming it. And one day, an editor from a women's publication reached out. She asked if I'd consider turning the blog into a column. "We need more stories like this," she wrote, "real ones." I said yes, not for revenge, not for fame, but because somewhere out there, another woman was sitting on her bathroom floor, staring at lipstick on her husband's collar, wondering if she was crazy. And she deserved to know she wasn't. She deserved to know that sometimes the betrayal doesn't come from across the street, it comes from the person who helped you build your life. And she deserved to know she could still build something new. I no longer think of Carly every day. Sometimes weeks go by without her name passing through my mind. But when it does, it no longer aches. It just is. A scar, not a wound. A lesson, not a loss. And if I ever do speak to her again, it won't be to ask why. It will be to say, thank you, because without her betrayal, I would have stayed asleep. I would have continued living in a house built on borrowed trust. Now, I live wide awake, not guarded, but aware. And that awareness is its own kind of peace. Because healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering who you were, and choosing who you'll become next.